Yo, listen up, because the story of America, it ain't what they told you in school. Forget the fairy tales about pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock or brave settlers carving freedom out of the wilderness. Nah, this is a tale soaked in blood, ambition, greed, and survival. A story that starts long before flags waved or ships sailed, back when this land was alive, ruled by native nations who had farms, trade, cities, and laws that stretched centuries before Europeans even dreamed of. Crossing the Atlantic, then came the ships. Big wooden monsters cutting through fog and storms, carrying men hungry for gold, land, and God. They thought the new world was empty, ripe for the taking, but it wasn't. It was full of life, culture, and people who fought to protect it, and yet, somehow, from this chaos, a nation emerged. The colonies grew, borders expanded, and the promise of freedom was preached. But only for some. Wars raged, empires clashed, and rebellions sparked as people who had been controlled their whole lives learned what it felt like to fight back. From Jamestown to Plymouth, from tobacco fields to bloody wars with native nations, from slavery to revolution, America was forged in contradiction. And today, that legacy still walks with us, hidden in cities, laws, culture, and the stories we tell. So buckle up, because this isn't a history. Listen, it's the raw, unfiltered story of colonization, ambition, and survival, told sense by sense, scene by scene, from the first ships in the fog to the modern nation we know today. You're about to see how America was really built, and what it cost. Not America wasn't born. Freedom was carved out of desperation, ambition, blood, and belief. Because long before skyscrapers and Super Bowls, this land was a wild promise whispered across the Atlantic, where broken men, restless dreamers, religious rebels, and ruthless investors believed the new world could fix what the old world crushed. And when the first European ships cut through the fog of the Atlantic, they didn't just bring hope. They brought hunger for land, for power, for God, and for gold, landing on shores already alive with ancient civilizations that had ruled this continent for thousands of years. Nations with deep traditions, complex trade systems, and spiritual ties to the earth itself. Yet, to the colonizers, these people weren't nations, they were obstacles. And as Jamestown struggled to survive through starvation, disease, and internal chaos, survival turned into domination, and trade turned into conquest. While up north, the Puritans stepped onto Plymouth Rock, believing God himself had chosen them to build a city upon a hill. A holy experiment that demanded obedience, discipline, and absolute control. And anyone who didn't fit their vision, Native Americans, dissenters, women who spoke too loudly, was pushed aside, punished, or erased. As forests fell to axes, towns rose from ashes, and treaties were signed only to be broken the moment they stopped being useful. While the land soaked up blood from battles that history textbooks would later reduce to footnotes, and as colonies expanded, so did greed. Because land meant wealth, crops meant profit, and profit demanded labor, which opened the darkest chapter of American colonization, the forced transportation of millions of enslaved Africans, chained, branded, and sold like cargo, building the economic backbone of a growing empire while being denied humanity itself. As plantations thrived and ports exploded with trade, while freedom remained a lie for many, and tensions grew not just with native tribes and enslaved people, but with the very empire that started it all. Because Britain wanted control and taxes, while colonists wanted autonomy and profit without restraint, turning resentment into rebellion, and rebellion into revolution. As muskets fired, declarations were written, and a new nation screamed its birth into history, claiming liberty and justice while still standing on stolen land and stolen lives. And even after independence, expansion didn't slow, it accelerated, with manifest destiny turning divine belief into a weapon, pushing settlers westward through forced removals, broken promises, and brutal wars. As native nations were marched off their lands on trails of death, gold was ripped from the ground, railroads split the continent like scars, and America transformed into a global force built on contradictions. Courage mixed with cruelty, freedom chained to oppression, faith used as fuel for domination. And today, when we look at the American flag waving proudly, it carries more than stars and stripes. It carries echoes of ships on dark waters, drums of vanished tribes, chains dragged through fields, and voices that history tried to silence. Because American colonization isn't just the past, it's the foundation. And understanding it isn't about guilt or glory, it's about truth. Because only by facing how America was really built can we understand what it has become and what it still might be. But the story doesn't stop at independence. Because winning a revolution didn't erase the habits of empire, it refined them. And as the newborn United States stretched its borders, it also stretched its justifications, rewriting conquest as destiny and violence as progress. As settlers poured west believing the land was empty because they were taught not to see the people already living on it, while the government perfected removal with paperwork and law, turning forced marshes into policy and broken treaties into routine. And native nations were crushed not just by bullets but by starvation, disease, and deliberate displacement, as the frontier myth was sold as freedom while it functioned as expansion by any means necessary. And slavery, far from fading, became more brutal and more profitable, with cotton turning the South into an economic machine powered by human suffering, where families were split, bodies worked to death, and resistance punished without mercy, even as the nation spoke the language of liberty louder than ever. And when that contradiction finally exploded into civil war, it wasn't just North versus South that was the bill for centuries of exploitation coming due. A war that ended slavery on paper but left racism embedded in the system, enforced through terror, segregation, and economic traps that kept power exactly where it had always been. While industrialization transformed America into a factory nation, pulling immigrants from across the globe into crowded cities where opportunity and exploitation lived side by side, as railroads, steel, and oil built immense wealth for a few while grinding millions into poverty. And overseas, America began exporting its colonial mindset beyond its borders, intervening in foreign lands, controlling resources, and reshaping governance while insisting it was spreading freedom. And by the time the 20th century arrived, the United States had mastered the art of power, economic, cultural projecting influence through war, trade, and media. Yet the same unresolved ghosts of colonization followed it forward, appearing in civil rights battles, land disputes, cultural erasure, and economic inequality, reminding the nation that history never really stays in the past, it just changes uniforms. Because colonization wasn't a single event, it was a process. One that evolved with technology, law, and language, shaping who benefits, who struggles, and whose stories get told. And today, when debates rage over monuments, borders, and identity, they're not random culture wars, they're echoes of unfinished history. Proof that America is still wrestling with the consequences of how it was built, and whether it has the courage to confront them honestly. Because understanding colonization isn't about tearing a nation down, it's about finally seeing it clearly, in all its power, pain, and possibility.